Dear Mahmoud Patel, academic from South Africa, and of course, a comrade as well as a colleague of Judge Esa Musa and Nelson Mandela as well. Thanks for joining us and thank you for accepting this interview.
Thank you, Comrade Adam. It's always a pleasure being here with you.
Thank you so much. So, dear Mahmoud, firstly, I would like to understand very shortly the history of South Africa, Nelson Mandela, and the peace process and the situation today in South Africa. So, let's start with that one just to enter our conversation.
Okay, initially, the peace process that led to the negotiated settlement in South Africa in 1994 was a long process that started while our leadership was incarcerated on Robben Island and other prisons throughout the country, as well as the thousands that were in exile and the thousands that were in the training camps in Angola, Tanzania, others were in the Soviet Union, Cuba, as well as in Yugoslavia and elsewhere in the then Warsaw Pact countries. They were all part of the broader liberation movement, as well as the groups that were in London, Europe, and in other African countries. We had a lot of solidarity, international solidarity partners, from the PLO to the Libyans at the time, the late Colonel Muammar Gaddafi, as well as those friends in Europe that supported the anti-apartheid cause very strongly. The primary function of all those who were in Europe and so on in the ANC, as well as the Pan Africanist and other structures that were in exile, was to lobby international support. Internally, the resistance against the apartheid state was an armed struggle together with other means of bringing the state to the negotiating table for political change for a democratic and peaceful South Africa that would be inclusive for everyone. Those on the ground were together collaborating with student organizations, community based organizations, and all individuals who were involved did not necessarily belong to the ANC or to the PAC, but they all subscribed to the common values: human rights, democracy, giving recognition of all native languages, which was suppressed during the apartheid state's brutal rule period from 1948 until 1994. The other important aspect of the lobbying was culturally, academically, and in political organizations, which were referred to as the civic organizations. The key focus at one point in our struggle was to get the release of all our leadership. And that included Nelson Mandela, or President Nelson Mandela, who was on Robben Island for a large part of his incarceration before he was transferred to another place under incarceration, Pollsmoor, and then Victor Verster in Paarl. The other political prisoners that were on the island as well. And they belong to the broad liberatory movement, the Black consciousness, the Pan Africanists, the South African Communist Party, African National Congress, including those who came from religious groupings, the imams as well as the Christian priests and so on. It was a broad based movement that started from the ground together with the people against the state of apartheid. We all agreed that you cannot have negotiations where leaders that are credible are not on the negotiating table. So the apartheid leadership mandated its representatives. And on the liberatory side, we wanted Nelson Mandela and our leaders to be there. And the apartheid state did eventually release Mr. Mandela in 1990, February. And that set the tone for formal process of negotiations, unbanning of the ANC, SACP, Pan-Africanist Congress, and all other movements. They were now unbanned, rescinded by law in the white government still at the time in 1990 under F.W. de Klerk. The next step to show good faith was to sit down at a negotiating table to negotiate the future of the country where everybody would be included, including the former oppressors. And that included a change of the law. And that's where this constitution that we have today was negotiated and crafted with both sides. The current president of South Africa, President Ramaphosa, was the chief negotiator that represented us at that negotiations. And for the apartheid state, it was Mr. Rolf Meyer, who's now appointed as an ambassador to the United States. And they represented the two sides broadly. We went through a negotiation process that culminated into the elections, the first democratic one, 4 years later in April 1994. But unlike the Kurdish process that's underway, all leaders were released and they were part of the decision making. Unlike what's happening in the peace process in Turkey currently, where leader Apo, Mr. Abdullah Öcalan, is still on the island of Imrali. And so too are many other political prisoners in the prisons in Turkey, as well as the few that are left on the island of Imrali. So that's a big difference. But the rallying point was the release of all leaders, a show of good faith. And before that really happened in 1990, for a period of a number of years, our leadership across the movement were trying to make headway with the regime directly as well as through representatives in the international solidarity to come to the negotiating table. So it was a long process. It didn't just magically happen in 1994. Before that, elections even took place. While negotiations were going on, the apartheid state still unleashed killings of our people while negotiating. You had the Boipatong massacre, the Bisho massacre, where civilians were killed by the apartheid state and its supporters. And that happened at a very important and critical point in negotiations. It could have allowed the country to descend into a bloody civil war. And had it not been for the leadership of Mr. Mandela, President Mandela, or Madiba, and all our other leaders who were there at the time across the board, Comrade Walter Sisulu, when Oliver Tambo was still alive after the process started and so on, together with late Comrade Joe Slovo, Pani Desai, who was from the Pan-Africanist Congress, Ibrahim, uh, Jacob Zuma was there, former President Jacob Zuma, President Thabo Mbeki, Eso Pahad, all these leaders, Srin Jinwala, they were all there. Judge Esa Musa, who was the secretary of the Constitutional Committee that led to the crafting of our Constitution as the architect and stalwart of this democracy, he was there too. Ourselves, who were much younger, were part of contributing in our different roles for this particular. Some were asked to do legal research. Others were asked to be part of committees. Others were mandated with policy redrafting. Discussions in different committees and groups had to take place. So while all this was going on, you had these massacres that were perpetrated against our people in the townships, in the streets. Youth were being killed, civilians were being killed. But the maturity, the understanding of the perils of the nation going forward became more important than settling scores amongst one another as well as against the former regime. And that, together with the maturity of Mr. Nelson Mandela and others, really brought us to the negotiating table. Remember Comrade Chris Hani, a great leader of not only the Communist Party, but a commander-in-chief of Umkhonto Wesizwe, which was the military wing of the African National Congress, of which many of us in the armed struggle served under, was assassinated by proven to be by the opposition right-wing political party, the Conservative Party, with a right-winger who came all the way from Poland. He was actually the assassin, Janusz Walus. And this assassination could have triggered a civil war. And our leadership came together, brought the oppressive regime representatives to say, if this continues, we're going to go back to guns. We can't allow this. And credit must also be given from the side of the oppressors that they realize too that this is dangerous. We can't let this continue. And that then allowed us to negotiate a new constitution, a political change where the one man, one vote came into play. No more just minority rights, only to the expense of the majority. And those clauses have been protected in the Constitution, the right to equality, minority rights, language rights. They're all part of our Bill of Rights. And South Africa's Constitution is considered by all legal scholars across the world as being the most progressive constitution there currently is. And it's a role model for most democracies. Judge Musa played a vital role in that as well. He was part of committees and different fact-finding missions that studied other constitutions in the world before we started the processes here and going forward. Many others contributed to that. Late Zola Skiwiya, currently former Minister in the Presidency, Jeff Radebe, Judge Albie Sachs, who 2 years ago was our guest at the International Conference for the Release of Abdullah Öcalan held here in South Africa, and other legal thinkers as well. We had a constitutional assembly that was constituted that specifically focused on the drafting of the constitution. And Hassan Ibrahim was the executive director. He currently is doing a lot of peace initiatives in Sudan and so on. And that constitutive assembly is what crafted this constitution. And the former chief negotiator of apartheid, Mr. Rolf Meyer, who's now appointed as an ambassador on behalf of South Africa at Washington by our President Ramaphosa, when I was with him almost a decade now, when we were busy with peace processes with other conflict areas. And one of the things he mentioned is that the night when they signed that interim constitution, it was such a relief for him personally as a person. And it showed the transformation to an extent that they came to a realization that apartheid was no more tenable. And they had to embrace values of democracy and had to learn to live with this going into the future, that they are no more in charge and they have to share the country with everybody. So, yes, I've tried to explain as much as possible in as brief time as possible. 12 minutes is not enough to explain this. You know, there are books written on this process, and there's a fantastic publication called The Soul of a Nation. It's a lovely book if anybody is interested in crafting a constitution for regions that have come out of conflict, like what's happening in Turkey currently between the oppressive fascist AKP and the Kurdish movement and the former PKK, as well as what's happening in Syria and any other conflict place in the world. They should study it as well. Look at our process as well. There's a lot to learn, how not to make mistakes, and a lot to learn on how to secure gains for everybody, including those who are oppressed, whether it is language rights, gender rights, equality, freedom of religion, freedom of political association, freedom of speech, freedom of expression, the right to education for all, the right to basic living, water, electricity, housing, the right to own property. All those kinds of rights, whether they are first generation, second generation, third generation human rights, need to be entrenched as a groundwork frame that can be used going into the future. So that book is something that scholars and negotiators should study. It shows how the constitution in South Africa came into being. That is a book. And some of our comrades who were part of the process are still with us. Unfortunately, many of the leadership are gone. Comrade Mac Maraj is still with us. He's very old now. He was part of the negotiations. He was the person who smuggled Madiba's biography, Long Walk to Freedom, out of Robben Island. And that's how we got the book, The Long Walk of Freedom. Many of our leaders have passed on, and those who are left, and the younger generation now, ourselves too, we are also getting older. But some of it that's documented should be studied. It's a good model. It shows one of the most progressive democracies in Africa and the world. So, in conclusion, the South African experience has much for everyone to gain. And also, we shouldn't romanticize it because it did have its fair share of challenges and obstacles. But above all, the spirit and unity of all those who come from the side of those who are oppressed must prevail. And indeed, you can be successful.
Secondly, what was the single most important factor that made the South Africa's peace process successful? Very shortly, please.
Okay, the willingness of the side of the regime to come to the negotiating table must be acknowledged. We couldn't be negotiating with ourselves. the former enemy had to be there. They had to accept that change must take place. Whether it was sincere, we can't judge them on that. But the fact is, they had to concede. They had to accept things, whether it was a compromise for them. And what President de Klerk at the time did with the white electorate, they did a referendum. And he wanted the mandate to negotiate on behalf of his white community. And the referendum that he had amongst the white constituency proved in the majority to support him going forward. When we look back retrospectively, they did not expect so much of concessions would have taken place. And many of them felt that after the democracy, uh, that they should not have done that because they realized that they negotiated themselves out of power in many things. And that is important to acknowledge as well, the position of the oppressor who realizes that the oppression is no longer tenable. They have to come and embrace the change that must take place, or they will become irrelevant. So that was important. Thirdly, if I may add, was the economic. We were very good at mobilizing international solidarity, and that pressure started to isolate apartheid South Africa. They were excluded from many things in the international community. And part of that was sanctions in many things. And that affected the white government's economy. And they realized that apartheid was no longer financially feasible and they needed to survive. And in order to survive, they needed to accept the negotiations to find a political solution. And the big business and mining industrialists who were white and still are in the majority today were the ones who also accepted that change must come. So all those different constituencies on the side of the white regime and the white rulers convinced them that it is for the survival of themselves and their children that they must embrace the negotiations. That's the
Thank
third.
you. Thank you so much. So, according to your experience about the peace process in South Africa, you have witnessed all the process. We are so lucky to find and talk to you. So, what should the Kurds need to pay attention right now? But please keep it to the point.
Simply focus on unity when one is negotiating. If you are negotiating a new constitution, or you are talking of this committee in parliament that must establish a new law that would be based on brotherhood, fraternity, and so on, it can only be based on true brotherhood if both sides fulfill their obligations, not only one side. So, yes, the Kurdish freedom movement has done so much since the announcement by Leader Apo and the movement when it sees the armed struggle in its entirety at the public display of the destruction of weapons and so on. Recently, again, there have been renewed calls for more concrete steps by the Turkish state. And not just the AKP, the state itself and all those who are part of the state machinery have to come forward and say, we are serious about this and we must now release Mr. Abdullah Öcalan and all the other Kurdish struggle stalwarts that are in prison as well. That must happen. If that happens, then there can be sincere negotiations. You can have laws enacted now, but if credible leaders are not there, part of that process, how can that law be a representation of all the people, its will, and its spirit?
Thank you so much. Also, another issue is also about the right to hope. So, could you address the urgency and the importance of fulfilling the rights of Kurdish leader Mr. Abdullah Öcalan as a human rights? Because right to hope is also a way for him to be able to work freely on this peace process. So, as there is also a saying that only a free man can negotiate. So. According to this phrase as well. So, what would you like to say about the importance of the right to op specifically, very shortly?
Right to hope is a legitimate expectation. It is something entrenched in human rights, in our understanding of all freedom movements that have a right to self-determination and a right to hope for the freedom based on that right to self-determination. There's no need to quote laws and treaties and all kinds of different human rights eloquent phrases that have been attributed to it. Simply put, free men only can negotiate. More importantly, every free human being can negotiate. Remember, it's not only about the men, it's about all human beings, the old, the young, the children, our citizens, and everybody who's part of things. Remember, we would not have had our democracy in South Africa. As imperfect as it may be, it is a democracy and it's functioning because our leaders were released to be part of the process. Look at any conflict area. Leaders must be released. If they are not released, how can a one sided yield any progress or something that's sustainable? It's unfair, it's unjust, and it serves no purpose. So let us then understand the concept that only free people can negotiate. Please release all the prisoners. Start with Mr. Abdullah Öcalan, and there shall be much more concrete steps taken to say there is a sincere effort coming from the Turkish state and it meets the expectations of all the people, not just some. The state is maybe concerned. It's going to negotiate itself out of power. It's going to create problems. And who is in charge may do certain things. But the apartheid state didn't end up doing that. They, in fact, served as part of the government of national unity after 1994 until they all resigned and left in 97. It's a historical fact. So, what is holding them back? You can't keep the Kurdish people and those who want freedom in the country in perpetually under oppression. It's not possible, it's not tenable.
Can lasting peace in Turkey be achieved without legal and democratic reforms, or are such reforms essential for the success? Dear Mahmoud, this one is very shortly with couple of sentences, please.
Oh, yes, legal reform is compulsory, it's mandatory, otherwise, there cannot be any ushering of a democracy. There has to be a right of all those who are in exile, a right of all those who are freedom fighters to return, as well as a right of integrating into society that is equitable and fair. You can't expect fighters who've grown up their whole life in the mountains or being guerrillas coming suddenly and being just dumped in a state. There needs to be a process that takes place. We had a kind of process like that in South Africa as well. Those of us who came from the armed struggle were amalgamated in the new structures, military, navy, and so on, as well as police structures, government, civil service, and of course, you need to upskill people. Fighters didn't do particular things. They need to be trained. There needs to be a process for that. And you start with laws. And then eventually it must translate into reality. So there has to be urgent reform. If there isn't reform legally and a ringing and decisive break with the law that was unjust and needs to be developed so that it can be of benefit to all the role players, in particular those who have been oppressed, and the release of all the leaders must be part of that process. You cannot have a democracy coming into play.
Thank you, dear Mahmoud. Lastly, shortly, as we always do on end of our program, your message for freedom for Kurdish leader, Mr. Öcalan. He might be able to watch this in the future. So, what is your message directly to him via our TV?
We look forward to your freedom and we look forward to meeting you with the free people in a free Turkey where your people can celebrate you as their leader and all the people of the free world can celebrate your leadership like we did when our president, Mr. Mandela, celebrated his victory as a president of South Africa. So we look forward to your freedom and to share the freedom with you. Mr. Abdullah Öcalan, from us here in South Africa and the African continent, we respect and salute your resoluteness as well as your strength and courage to endure for the freedom of your people. And we look forward to that freedom and the day when you all shall be free and share in the spoils of your struggles for your victory to democracy.
Thank you so much, dear Mahmoud Patel, academic from South Africa, and also importantly, historically, a comrade of Judge Essa Musa and Nelson Mandela as well. Thanks for joining us. Thank you for your valuable comments.
Thank you, Comrade Aram. All the best to you and your viewers and listeners.